before ride sharing was common and Uber wanted to introduce it in the market. Imagine them asking in the streets whether people want to jump in a stranger's car and go somewhere. I'm almost certain that that is something that users may not be comfortable with. And if Uber simply just listened to feedback like that, they may not actually launch their product, which has really shaped the ride-sharing industry in present day. So UX research is not about asking what users want. What exactly is it? The best way to explain it and how it applies and how it's important to products is using this example. So there are 75.4 million millennials in the world. This is statistics from the Pew Research Center in 2015. And among the 75.4 million millennials in the world, multiple fintech companies are targeting millennials. I decided to use fintech as an example because I am constantly bombarded with ads for different ways to budget, different ways to invest for the future. And I know for sure that these ads are all targeting 18 to 35-year-olds or 18 to 36-year-olds with these new budgeting or financial planning methods. Some examples of these companies are Personal Capital, Birch, Finance, Mint, You Need a Budget, Capital. Even their names sound quite similar. All of these companies are targeting the same audience with similar products. So one of the ways that they could truly be different is if they really understand the users and find product market fit. So I believe that successful companies are the ones that are able to find product market fit. And in order to find product market fit, they need to be able to answer three core things. One, who are our users? So not what they want, but who are they? Define who the users are. Are they 18 to 34-year-olds in coffee shops who are confused about what to do on the weekend, or 18 to 34-year-olds with student debt? How are they struggling in the world? And finally, after you get a stronger understanding of who the users are the users able to use the product that you create enjoyably? If these three questions are answered, I believe that companies would be more prepared to really have that product market fit. UX research ensures that people are at the center of the product design process. This is similar to UX design also, which focuses, of course, more on the design aspect of it, but essentially anything that's related to user experience ensures that humans and people, the users, are really at the center of the design process. And UX research or UX design does this through 4 key steps. Number 1, relevancy. Relevancy answers, like I mentioned earlier, who are the users? How are they struggling? Is the product really relevant to them? Usability. Do users understand how to use the product? This is the most common understanding of UX research. You may have heard of usability tests where users come in and test the product, see if they understand the flow, see if they're able to check out an item if it's an e-commerce, see if they're able to interact with certain features, if it's maybe a social media. The third aspect is delight. Do users enjoy using the product? Will they continue to use the product in the future? And finally, return on investment. How do I make the trade-off between achieving business goals and the best user experience? The final point, or return on investment, is typically not very apparent in terms of the responsibility of a UX researcher. UX research helps answer whether at this moment in time, the organization should prioritize the best user experience or achieving business goals. This does not happen all the time, but it may. And an example is, let's say with the pressure of shipping products really fast, we may not be able to create the best user experience at this time. Users may not completely understand the product. It's not terrible, but maybe the flow is a little bit confusing, but in order to make it clearer, you would need more engineering resources, and there's just not any engineering resources at this time. The data that you gain from UX research will help you answer whether the experience is okay enough that it's fine for the company to move forward with the business goal and ship the product and iterate on it after shipping, or whether it makes more sense to spend more time on the user experience and maybe not achieve the business goal for this period in time, and prioritize the user experience over that. So return on investment is typically the hardest job of a UX researcher, and it involves a lot of cross-functional input and discussions, but the data does help make the prioritization decision. And I think it's very apparent in the market that these decisions are being made when, let's say, you're using an app and you realize maybe it's not the best user experience at the moment. There is perhaps a return on investment decision being made in the background. So how do UX researchers do this? How do they achieve those 4 different important aspects, and how do they ask all of the questions that I mentioned earlier? There are a ton of user experience research methodologies, and explaining them all would take hours or even maybe hundreds of pages of books. There are textbooks about it, but I'd love to give a quick overview of the methodologies, which some of you may have heard either from classes in college, from participating in research in the psychology or economics department, from receiving emails or recruitment requests from companies to participate in studies. So I'm pretty sure most of these methodologies are quite familiar, at least by the name. So common UX research methods usually fit very neatly into the product life cycle. So before creating the product, of course, you'd want to understand who are the users and how are they struggling. One major way to do this is to build user personas and understand, let's say, if you have a general idea that you want to solve a problem in healthcare, who exactly is struggling within healthcare and how are they struggling? What is the opportunity there? And when you start creating the product, even before finished creating the product, let's say you started creating a wireframe or some sketches, you'd want to start understanding whether users are able to understand the product. And eventually, once the prototype or the wireframe is more fully fledged out, are they able to successfully use the product? And at that point in time, before shipping the product, are there any ways we can optimize the product to make it easier to use? A good example of this is if you're working on an e-commerce site and you realize after creating the initial prototype of the site, users take so long to check out when they want to purchase an item, or they're unable to apply a promotion because they don't know how to do it. These are stuff that you should be able to catch on while designing the product and make sure that you fix it before shipping the product. The research doesn't end when you ship the product. After shipping the product, you'd of course want to understand whether users currently enjoy using the product, and whether, based on their experience with the product, will they continue to use the product? And this is not simply asking, are you likely to use it in the future? There are questions like that, but in addition to self-reported data, of course, we'd want to be able to predict future usage intent through how frequently users use the product, whether they actually recommend the product to others. There's just a whole host of ways to answer, will they continue to use the product? And finally, find ways where the product could be improved and could be optimized even further at the next iteration. So fitting under these 3 different moments in the product lifecycle, I broke the research methodologies down to 2 different core elements. You will see here it's you start with generative research and then eventually transition to evaluative. Most of the research work that is done is within the evaluative stage. Generative is typically before the product is created, when you truly want to understand who the users are and the behaviors in the market. UX research is not complete without generative research. You don't necessarily always do generative research in the beginning. You have to do it throughout the process and continue to add it to what you discovered in the beginning of the research. Behavior constantly changes, especially as technology continues to develop. The way we interact with product changes. If the way we interact currently with Google Maps today compared to Google Maps 4 years ago is completely different. So behavior is always changing, and it's important to constantly do generative research throughout the product lifecycle. Example of generative studies include in-depth interviews, so really talking to the users, or people who fit under that target audience that you would like to build a product for, and asking what their pain points are. Ethnographies, which means going to where the users are. If your target users are small business owners, going to the actual small business stores and observing how they interact with their customers every single day, what the pain points are in their interactions. You can also do social behavioral experiments, which is always fun. Let's say you're inviting a user in to play a card sorting game, or using the card sorting game to really understand what the perception, any differences in perception to a specific concept that you're testing, and you can also get some generative insights through surveys. So once you really understand who the users are, you would create some early version of the product, whether it's sketches or wireframes, and run early evaluation tests, which includes concept testing, showing the concept to users and talking to them about it, and also listening to how they make sense of the concept. It's really important at this stage to listen to not just the feedback that the users give, but also the questions that they ask to you regarding the concept, because that I find personally that the questions are more telling of what areas they personally do not understand and they personally deem as most important for them to understand. Conjoint analysis or trade-off analysis helps you determine what features to prioritize and in the least biased way possible. Card sorting studies, which is usually typical if you're designing an e-commerce and you want to understand which part of the website should fall under which category. Wireframe testing. And once you have a more final prototype that's more interactive, you would run a usability test, whether moderated, which means you're there to talk to the users, or unmoderated. There are platforms like usertesting.com that's really good for unmoderated tests. You upload your prototype, and within a few hours you get completed videos of people actually testing the prototypes, and you're able to understand the success and error rates, so where users really struggle to use your product and where they're successful, and what areas really cause or really triggers delight. And finally, after you ship the product, you would run summative evaluation studies, which includes customer experience surveys, ethnographies. So you may have seen ethnographies earlier in generative studies. It's also really important in certain cases after you launch a product to go out and observe people interacting with your product in real time. Related to ethnographies are contextual interviews. So as people interact with products in real time, it's also great insight to be able to get them to talk and give you feedback about the product as they interact with it. Some other summative evaluation studies that I did not mention here that are important are also diary studies, because people don't just interact with product at one given point in time. Sometimes they use it continuously. So diary studies involve texting usually the users a few times a week or every single day at a specific time, asking them what their experience with your product is like, to check for longitudinal changes. So one thing that's really important in a UX researcher's job is that understanding the user is really not just the job of a researcher. User empathy is the responsibility of the team, and it's the UX researcher's job to ensure that the team develops user empathy. And by team, I mean people in marketing, people in product, designers, engineers. Everyone needs to be involved in really developing the user empathy. So the user is always in the center of the product design process. And because this is so important, it's a crucial role in the UX researcher's job to ensure that there are opportunities for team members to develop user empathy by inviting them to research sessions, by creating research sessions that are specifically geared for people in the team to really understand the users without having to learn about how to conduct a research session. So for example, coming into ethnographies and just doing the observations or observing contextual interviews or doing internal within the company studies where users could just give users within the company, people within the company, employees use the product and can just give feedback to each other. I really truly believe that user empathy, again, is the responsibility of the team, and it is a very crucial aspect to achieving that product market fit and achieving and keeping users at the center of the products that you create.